Red Flags of Emotional Repression, Part 45, Identification. So first of all, let me say that there's nothing wrong or weird about identifying with a political party or a religion or a nationality or a socioeconomic class or sexual orientation or a gender. This is something that, most people do. So why is it a red flag of emotional repression? Well, because identity is arguably the #1 hiding place for buried and repressed emotions. Meaning people will identify with a certain or specific belief about themselves in order not to have to acknowledge, access, feel, or express the emotions that have been buried in their bodies since they were kids. Today, I'm just going to give you a couple examples of what this looks like. First, with politics. I've got a friend who I love who talks about his political views like this. Yeah, I tend to lean conservative, probably at least partially because of the way I was raised, but also because as an adult, those values match mine, so that works for me, but to each his own. Now that opposed to a guy I used to work with who described his politics like this: "Don't tread on me, motherfucker. God, guns, and country. That's all that matters, and that's what those snowflake libtards need to wake up to." Now, I'll leave it to you to decide who you think of those two is using identity or identification to hide their buried, repressed emotions. Now, here's another with sexual orientation. I had a friend in college who was gay and was very outspoken, right? He was like an activist for it. He'd say things like, "We're here, we're queer, so disappear, right? Stay out of our way. This is about gay pride, and if you don't like it, you can kiss my ass." Opposed to my good friend currently, Scott Killaby, who's the main developer of the Killaby Inquiry's emotional repression work, who describes his sexuality like this. "Yeah, I happen to be gay. I've always known it, and it's just kind of the way things are." Again, which of those two would you say is using identity to repress buried emotions? Last example, gender roles. There's a guy that I was watching the other day online talking about the masculine and the feminine, right? So masculinity and femininity. And he was saying that the traditional masculine ought to be stoic, strong, and unaffected by the emotionality of the feminine or of the woman that he's with, right? So that he can hold space for her and be a container for her chaos, right? So to this guy, that's what true masculinity and femininity look like, right? Those are the ideal gender roles. Now, here's the thing. I've worked with a lot of women whose buried, repressed emotions, many times anger, shows up on the surface of their lives as emotionality and chaos. And also with many guys whose buried, repressed emotions, many times hurt, vulnerability, and sadness, shows up on the surface as stoicism and unfeelingness. So it seems to me that with this guy, it was a case of conflating identification with the masculine and the feminine with anger repression and hurt repression. And frankly, I think this is what anyone with strict gender roles is doing, right? If you find yourself trying to live up to some ideal, it means you're probably trying to avoid some buried, repressed emotion. Now, the alternative to the suffering of all of this identification is to come out of emotional repression so that you can just be yourself. We truly don't have to be so trapped in identification with liberalism or conservatism or homosexuality or heterosexuality or masculinity or femininity or religiousness or spirituality or atheism. Once you start resolving your emotional repression and are finally able to be your authentic self again, you're not going to be concerned with any of those things because you're going to see them for what they are, right? Which is a set of beliefs. Like it's an artificial edifice, one that kept you in emotional repression and suffering, right? So now that you're coming out of emotional repression and suffering, what's the point? You'll be blown away by what jamming yourself into a box in order to get safety and love feels like when it goes away. If you'd like to experience it for yourself, come work with me at the link in the caption or the bio.